Welcome to the Safety Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFeTy program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert, and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. Hey, everybody, welcome back. So I want to dive into the topic on what the link is. What is this link between animal abuse and family violence, such as domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse? What is it? So we have about 4 decades worth of research, and it's international. And the research is all telling us the same thing. So some of the numbers change slightly between the research studies, but I want to give you a foundation of what this really is. So this is a presentation that I have given literally around the world to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of audiences to raise awareness for anyone who is coming into contact with a human or animal victim. They need to know the link, because then it's going to inform the response that they have. So why is this important? All right. So the foundation of the link is that at least here in the United States, 70% of homes in the US have a pet. That is as of 2023, 70%. All right, it's more than 2/3 of American homes have a pet. So in the research, we have learned that animals are targeted by abusers in order to threaten, control, and coerce human victims. And they're doing it to gain compliance with what is happening in the home and silence. The underlying message is, if I can do this to the dog, I can do this to you. So keep quiet. All right. What we know in the research is that animal abuse presents a risk to children and child abuse. It may be predictive of future violence towards animals or people. It is an indicator. Animal abuse is an indicator of what's going on in the home. So, when I am teaching criminal justice audiences, especially human protection professionals and law enforcement, I explain to them that when they're going to a home and there are dogs that are tied up outside, malnourished, they appear to not have sufficient food or water or shelter, they look malnourished, like you can see their rib cage, they look neglected, that is an indicator of what may be going on in the home. They need to take it seriously. They need to take a look at that. They need to take a look and not just brush it off as, oh, it's just an animal. Every state in the United States and many countries have animal abuse protection laws. So gone are the days of, oh, it's just an animal. I dealt with that early on in my career, and now I can say we don't hear that very much. And if you ever hear that in your community, you get vocal. Okay, get vocal. So animal abuse can not only be an indicator of what's happening in the home, but it can be a predictor of what may be coming. Because when a batterer is abusing animals, it is threatening to the human victims. It is coercive to the human victims. And it can prevent the humans from leaving that abusive home and seeking safe shelter, especially if they have to leave their animals behind. And animals, it may not just be the family cat, dog, rabbit, bird. It could be a cow. It could be a goat. It could be sheep. It could be a horse. And what we find in the research is that when these forms of violence occur in a home, they co-occur, it actually increases the rate of future violence. So there are high rates of, when there is animal abuse, you're likely to find domestic violence, child abuse, and animal abuse. I always say to my audiences, violence is violence, whether it's committed against a two-legged or a four-legged being. That is a violent home, and that needs to be looked at. So one thing that we look at, especially in the domestic violence world, and I want to share my screen here, we look at what we call the power and control wheel. All right. So the power and control wheel outlines the various behaviors that are indicative of domestic violence. Well, animal abuse is listed in the power and control wheel. Okay, so this is where we really, really need to take this seriously. We need to really take animal abuse seriously. So let me talk about what I have found as a former prosecutor, being in this field for almost 30 years. This is how I see animal abuse linking to other crimes, because I find that it doesn't happen in isolation. Now, as I said in the intro, I don't get graphic, okay? I'm not going to get graphic. Nobody needs to worry about that, okay? But I want to detail where we're seeing animal abuse linked to other crimes. Animal fighting, dog fighting, links to assaults, child abuse, illegal drugs, drunk driving, gambling, robbery, sexual assault, weapons offenses, homicide. Okay, we see animal hoarding linking to child neglect and elder abuse. We find child abuse linking to witnessing animal abuse, children being forced by an abuser to harm an animal, children being forced to witness domestic violence, or children being in situations where animal hoarding is happening. And that creates a host of physical and mental health issues for children. We find that domestic violence and sexual assault links to animal abuse, and really targeting the pet to prevent reporting and to prevent leaving. Okay, we find elder abuse is linked to animal neglect. I remember back in the day when I was at the American Humane Association, I was having conversations with the National Meals on Wheels about providing pet food to those elderly people getting Meals on Wheels, because there were too many reports that they were giving their meal to their pet. So probably not the best for the pet and not the best for the elderly person. So we had those conversations, and many independent, locally run Meals on Wheels do offer pet food. So that helps with that. But we also find that elder abuse is linked to financial exploitation, where the animals are threatened as part of the financial exploitation. And then when it comes to juvenile crimes, we find witnessing animal abuse can lead to aggressive, violent, bullying behavior. It can lead to to domestic violence, and it can lead to their own maltreatment. So there's a lot of links going on here, and hence that's why we call it the link. So there's a lot of research. There's a lot of research. If you really want to dig into the research, I highly recommend that you check out nationallinkcoalition.org. Sign up for their newsletter. I'm on the board of directors. I have been on the steering committee since it was created in 2008. And there's a lot of information on there. But what we find, like there's one study that I really, it was a very powerful study for me. I think it came out in 2008, and it talked about how individuals who witness animal cruelty in the home, are over 8 times more likely to become a perpetrator of violence against either humans or animals. 8 times more likely from the sheer fact of witnessing. Oh, that really impressed upon me. So when we're thinking about those in the home that need to leave and get to safety, but they're staying behind because of their pets, I think about the kids. What are they being taught? I mean, we all know kids are sponges, right? So they're learning that behavior, and it's becoming normalized. That's not okay. And that study told us that witnessing animal cruelty was the biggest predictor of later violence by the witness. Witnessing it was the biggest predictor. And when witnessing animal cruelty linked with child abuse or being exposed to domestic violence, it actually increased the risk of animal abuse. Okay. So, the studies tell us that, up to 76% of animal cruelty occurs in the home in front of children. That's not okay. That's not okay. That can be very psychologically damaging for children. And there was one study that said that up to 78% of children will risk their safety to protect an animal. I totally get that. And as a prosecutor, I wanted that information to put in front of a jury, because that's powerful information. But children are putting themselves in harm's way to protect their parent, their mom or their dad from being abused, as well as their animals. Now, there was another study by Frank Ascione, a dear friend, a significant contributor to the link research field. In one of his studies, he found that shelter women were 11 times more likely to report that their partner had hurt or killed their pet. 11 times more likely than a woman in a home not experiencing abuse. 11 times more likely. So that really told us that animal abuse links to family violence, and at higher rates. He also found in the study that women were 4 times higher to report that their pet had been threatened. So again, higher threats for those experiencing domestic violence. And in that same study, he found that 2/3 of children had observed the animal abuse, and over 37% of them had gone on to harm or kill their own pet. Because again, learned behavior. They're learning this in the home. So one of the strongest studies that we have in this field comes out of a 7-year period covering 11 different locations, and they were looking at factors that initiate battering behavior. Now, the study did not set out to focus on animal abuse, but when the results came in, there were 4 that rose to the top, 4 behaviors. 1, mental illness. Number 2, drug use. Number 3, education. And number 4, animal abuse. Not necessarily in that order, but animal abuse was a significant variable that rose to the top for becoming a batterer. And then Andrew Campbell, who has been on the scene in recent years doing some amazing research, and I've had great conversations with him. Back in 2008, he did a study and he found increased rates of abusers harming animals related to increased rates of gun ownership, mental illness, strangling a victim, and the victim being killed. So when he looked at those 4 variables, they linked at higher rates to animal abuse. And then another study that came out in 2007, and I'm going to quote this. Batterers who also abuse their pets are more controlling and use more dangerous forms of violence, such as sexual violence, marital rape, emotional violence, and stalking, than batterers who do not. And this is why we take animal abuse seriously. And this is why I have spent a bulk of my career in the criminal justice prosecution field educating and teaching prosecutors, law enforcement, child protection professionals, domestic violence professionals, animal protection professionals, medical professionals, treatment providers, veterinarians, animal shelters, anybody who is coming into contact with a human or an animal victim. They need to understand this link because they could truly save a life. So I was going to save this for another podcast, but I feel like I need to talk about it now. I often get the question, why are animals abused? So chances are, if you're listening to this, you love animals. You have animals at home. You love them. I love them. I have 3 cats. Love them. Heck, I have a cat unicorn on my wall here. Okay. So I often get the question, why are animals abused? So there was a very, very powerful study conducted in New Zealand, and it was conducted by the Royal New Zealand SPCA in conjunction with the New Zealand Women's Refuge, which is a large domestic violence organization. And they commissioned an extensive study on family violence and animal abuse and produced a 75-page report called Pets as Pawns. I'm sure you can Google it and find it. If I'm sure I have it, maybe I can get it in the notes below. But this report focused on actual and threatened animal abuse as a barrier to women and children trying to get themselves out of the violent situation, but also broke new ground in identifying how animal cruelty was employed by perpetrators. So why the animal abuse happened? Number one, to normalize the violence in the home. Like I said, violence is violence, whether it's committed against a 2-legged or 4-legged being. It's normalized, okay? So everybody is in harm's way. Number two, the abusers gained perverse satisfaction from harming animals and seeing the fear it instilled in the humans. Number three, they were punishing the animals for the person's misbehavior. And I say that in quotes because abusers will gaslight and come up with ridiculous reasons of what they consider misbehavior, and then they harm the animal as a punishment. Like, if you keep doing this, if you keep leaving and going out with your friends, your dog's going to pay the price for it, okay? Number four, jealousy of the pet, the human-animal bond. There was even a study that found that the more an abuse victim was bonded to their pet, the more likely the pet was going to be harmed, because it's a jealousy factor. The fifth reason was to demonstrate intolerance for rules being broken. So basically, if you do something I don't like, the dog or the cat is going to get punished. So basically, if I can do this to the cat, I can do it to you. Okay, so it's instilling that coercive fear and compliance in the victims. They also found that animals were targeted, threatened, harmed, or even killed to keep the humans from leaving. The abusers wanted them to stay in the home so they could continue their abusive cycle. Sometimes the pets were just collateral violence, not even the target. Dogs coming to the rescue of a child gets hurt in the process. But they also found that the abusers had no fear of police action. No fear. So this is why there has been such an effort to make animal abuse an important reportable offense. And many years ago, I want to say in 2016, through a real large group coalition effort in conjunction with the National Sheriff's Association, we got the FBI finally tracking animal abuse. And you know how state and local jurisdictions report their numbers It's to a national reporting database. And so you get, like the national robbery and homicide numbers. Well, now they're tracking animal abuse. And that's a recent development. Okay. So we're just starting to get numbers on that. So, but batters just feel like it's just an animal. The police aren't going to do anything about it. Not true anymore. Now, some jurisdictions are better than others. But this study out of New Zealand also found that cruelty to animals continued even when the human got to safety, left that environment, but they had to leave their pet behind. And the abusers were doing this to create anxiety to force the human victim to return as malicious punishment for leaving. And the abuser would even go to the friends and the extended family to hurt their animals as retribution. Basically, how dare you leave? And hence that power and control wheel. It's power and control. Now, the study and many studies have talked about how there's lack of pet-friendly rentals, lack of pet-friendly domestic violence shelters, prohibitive costs in boarding animals at veterinary clinics or boarding facilities, logistical problems of how to get the animals out, how to transport them. And so these all create barriers to safety, and it's worse in rural communities. Okay. So I see stories in the news pretty much every day, and some make a national news and others just make local news. And my recommendation to you is to start looking for them. See what's going on in your community, because if animal abuse is not being taken seriously in your community, you have a voice. You have a voice. And I've done a lot of advocacy work. I have written legislation. I've testified in front of legislative bodies. I've gotten legislation passed. I am a significant advocate. And I even wrote a book, Defending the Defenseless. It's still on Amazon, and it's called A Guide to Protecting and Advocating for Pets. And it's got loads of ideas on how to help. If you just want to go on to Amazon and get it. So, but squeaky wheel gets the results, right? So I get emails from people saying, this incident happened in my community, animal control or the police are not investigating. And I'm like, you keep calling. You keep calling and tell them this appears to be a violation of the law. You took a sworn oath to uphold the law. You have to investigate. That investigative report then has to go to the prosecutor. You can call the prosecutor. I used to get calls all the time asking me, what's going on with this case? Call the prosecutor. And if you are not getting results, you keep going up the chain of command. Now, in every jurisdiction in every state, it's different. Here in my state of Michigan, animal control typically investigates. If they don't do it, I tell people, call the Michigan State Police. You start going up the chain of command. If that doesn't work, you go to your local prosecutor. If that doesn't work, you go to the Michigan State Attorney General. You start going up the chain of command. And if none of that works, go to the media. Go to the media. Make it public. Sometimes it takes something like that to make it understandable to the community and to the professionals. So, I am pleased to say at this point in 2023, animal abuse is being taken more seriously, because just the little bit of information that I've shared with you and will continue to share in this podcast, professionals are getting it. Goodness knows I have preached my heart out on my soapbox at presentations, international conferences, national conferences, state conferences, local conferences. I have gotten on my soapbox and I'm like, you must take this seriously. And here's why. I thought about this all the time when I was a prosecutor. By taking a case seriously, doing your best, not short selling it and undercutting it and treating it like it's nothing. Taking it seriously, you never know what you're preventing. You never know what you're preventing. Let me give you an example. So, there's a lot of news stories, like I said, about people being arrested for child abuse, domestic violence, animal hoarding. They're finding all these links. So back in February 2018, you probably remember Nicholas Cruz took a gun into the Parkland, Florida high school, killed 17 students, and injured 14 others. Before that, he bragged about torturing and killing animals. Did anybody do anything about it? Nope. He was abusive to his girlfriend. And he claimed he was going to be a professional school shooter. Imagine if the torturing and the killing had been taken seriously. These are the what ifs that keep me doing what I'm doing. Because if I can impress that upon you, what if you take it seriously? What if you report what your neighbor's doing? What if you are in a field where you take it seriously? What if you're a police officer? What if you're a child protection worker? What if you're an animal control officer? What if you're a prosecutor? What if you're a judge? What if you take it seriously? You never know what you're preventing. And that's how I ran my entire career as a prosecutor. Do a good job, do a great job. Take each case seriously. Don't undercut it. Don't undersell it. Don't plea bargain everything out. Take these sort of cases seriously. You never know what you're preventing. Okay, so that's my message today. All right, hope to see you back here on the next podcast. Thanks for tuning in.